Tommy Rodriguez wiped the grease off his hands with an old rag and looked up from the engine he was fixing. It was another hot summer morning at the army base in Colorado, and he had 3 more cars to finish before lunch. At 18, Tommy had been working at the base auto shop for 6 months now, saving every penny for college. His dad always told him that hard work would pay off someday. Tommy's parents had come from Mexico with nothing but hope and determination. They worked in the fields, picking crops from sunrise to sunset, just so Tommy and his little sister could have better lives. Now Tommy was the first person in his family to even think about going to college. The auto shop was busy that morning when she walked in. Tommy had seen plenty of officers' kids before, but this girl was different. She had long black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wore jeans and a college t-shirt instead of fancy clothes. When she smiled at the front desk guy, her whole face lit up. "Excuse me," she said to Bobby, who ran the front counter. "My car is making this weird noise when I turn left. Think you guys can take a look?" Tommy tried not to stare, but there was something about her that made him forget what he was doing. She wasn't stuck up like most of the officers' daughters. When Bobby told her it might take a few hours, she just shrugged and said she'd wait. "That's Colonel Patterson's daughter," Bobby whispered to Tommy later. "Her name's Maria. Just graduated from some fancy college back east. Smart as a whip, they say, Colonel Patterson." Tommy knew that name. Everyone on base knew Colonel Patterson. He was the kind of officer who could end your career with just one phone call. The kind of man who expected perfection from everyone around him, especially his family. Tommy watched Maria from across the shop as he worked. She sat in the waiting area reading a thick book about space and stars. Every now and then, she'd look up and catch him staring. Instead of getting annoyed, she'd just smile and go back to reading. Around noon, Tommy was the one assigned to look at her car. His heart was beating fast as he walked over to where she was sitting. "Miss Patterson, I'm Tommy. I'll be working on your car today." She looked up from her book and smiled. "Just call me Maria, and thank you." "What's that you're reading?" Tommy asked, trying to make conversation while they walked to her car. "Oh, this." She held up the book. "It's about astronomy. I'm kind of obsessed with space and planets and all that stuff. I know it sounds boring to most people." "No way," Tommy said quickly. "That sounds really cool. I've always wondered about what's out there." Maria's face brightened. "Really? Most people think I'm weird for caring about stars and moons on other planets." Tommy opened the hood of her Honda and started looking at the engine. "My dad used to tell me stories about the stars when I was little. He said each one was like a door to another world." "Your dad sounds wise," Maria said, leaning against the car. "Mine thinks I should focus on more practical things." As Tommy worked on her car, they kept talking. Maria told him about college, about her dreams of maybe working for NASA someday. Tommy shared his plans to study engineering, how he wanted to build things that could help people. "You know," Maria said, "engineers and astronomers aren't that different. We both want to understand how things work, just in different ways." Tommy had never thought about it like that, but she was right. For the first time in months, he felt like someone actually understood what he was trying to do with his life. The car problem turned out to be simple, just a loose belt that needed tightening. But Tommy worked slowly, not wanting their conversation to end. Maria didn't seem to mind. She asked him questions about engines and seemed genuinely interested in his answers. "All done," Tommy finally said, closing the hood. "Should be good as new now." "How much do I owe you?" Maria asked, reaching for her purse. "Oh, you don't pay me directly. You settle up with Bobby at the front desk." They walked back toward the office together. Tommy was trying to think of something else to say when a black car pulled up in front of the shop. The driver got out, and Tommy's stomach dropped. Colonel Patterson was exactly what you'd expect. Tall, stern, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. His uniform was perfect, not a single wrinkle anywhere. When he looked at Tommy, it was like being examined by a machine that was deciding whether you were worth its time. "Maria," the colonel said, his voice crisp and commanding. "I came to check on your car situation." "It's all fixed, Dad," Maria said quickly. "Tommy here took great care of it." The colonel's eyes swept over Tommy from head to toe. Tommy could feel himself being measured and found lacking. It took exactly 3 seconds, but it felt like forever. "I see," Colonel Patterson said coldly. "Well, let's get this settled and head home. Your mother is expecting us for lunch." Tommy watched as Maria paid Bobby and gathered her things. She looked back at him once, gave him a small wave, and then got into her dad's car. As they drove away, Tommy realized he hadn't even asked for her phone number. Bobby walked up beside him, shaking his head. "Don't even think about it, kid. Think about what that girl, I saw how you two were talking." "Trust me," Guys like us don't end up with girls like her. Her dad would make sure of that. Tommy wanted to argue, but deep down he knew Bobby was right. Maria lived in a world of officers' clubs and fancy dinners. Tommy lived in a world of overtime shifts and hand-me-down clothes. They might as well have been from different planets. But as he went back to work on the next car, Tommy couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. About how Maria had listened to him like his dreams actually mattered. About how her face had lit up when she talked about the stars. Maybe Bobby was right. Maybe it was impossible. But for 2 hours that morning, sitting in a greasy auto shop, Tommy had felt like anything was possible. And that feeling was hard to shake. The rest of the day dragged by slowly. Every time a car pulled up, Tommy hoped it might be Maria coming back, but it never was. By closing time, he had convinced himself that their conversation hadn't meant as much to her as it had to him. He was wrong about that, but he wouldn't find out for another 3 days. Tommy drove home that evening in his beat-up pickup truck, thinking about Maria's book and her dreams of working with NASA. He thought about his own dreams of becoming an engineer, of building bridges and buildings that would last for generations. His parents were waiting for him at their small apartment off base. His mum had dinner ready, rice, beans, and chicken, the same meal they had most nights. But Tommy didn't mind. It tasted like home, like love, like sacrifice. How was work today, Mio? His mum asked as they sat down to eat. Good, Tommy said. Fixed a lot of cars, met some interesting people. His dad looked at him over his beer. Remember what I always tell you, Tommy, work hard, be respectful, and opportunities will come. Tommy nodded, but he was thinking about Maria's smile and wondering if some opportunities were just too far out of reach for someone like him. Little did he know that Maria was sitting at her family's dinner table at that exact moment, thinking about the same thing. 3 days later, Maria's car was back at the shop. This time, she said the radio wasn't working properly. Tommy suspected there was nothing wrong with the radio, but he wasn't about to complain. Let me take a look, he said, trying to hide his excitement. As he worked on her car, they picked up their conversation right where they'd left off. Maria had brought a different book this time, something about rocket science. She seemed genuinely interested in watching Tommy work, asking questions about how engines worked and why certain parts were important. You know, she said, my dad thinks I should study something more practical, maybe business or education, something suitable for a military wife. Tommy looked up from the dashboard. What do you want to study? Astronomy. I want to work for NASA someday, maybe help design missions to other planets. She paused. I know it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy at all, Tommy said firmly. It sounds amazing. Their eyes met for a moment, and Tommy felt that same electric feeling from 3 days ago. Maria smiled, and he could tell she was thinking the same thing. The radio's fine, he said finally. Must have just been a loose wire. Oh, Maria said, sounding almost disappointed. Well, thanks for checking. As she was about to leave, she stopped and turned back. Tommy, do you know that little diner about 10 minutes off base? The one with the blue sign? Mickey's Place. Yeah, I know it. I sometimes go there for coffee in the evenings, around 8. You know, if you ever want to continue our conversation about engines and space. She smiled nervously, just as friends, of course. Tommy's heart was racing. Yeah, that sounds good. Maybe I'll see you there sometime. That evening, Tommy changed clothes 3 times before driving to Mickey's diner. He'd never been so nervous about a simple conversation. When he walked in, Maria was already there, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee. I took the liberty of ordering for you, she said. Hope that's okay. They talked for 2 hours straight. About everything and nothing. Maria told him about college, about feeling like she never quite fit in anywhere. Tommy shared stories about his family, about working multiple jobs to save money for school. You're going to make a great engineer, Maria said. I can tell you really care about making things better for people. And you're going to be an amazing scientist, Tommy replied. The way you talk about space, it's like you're already there. When it was time to leave, they both lingered by their cars in the parking lot. Same time tomorrow, Maria asked hopefully. I'll be here, Tommy said, and so it began. Almost every evening for the next 2 weeks, they met at Mickey's diner. Sometimes, they'd stay for hours. Sometimes Maria would suggest they go for a drive. She showed him parts of Colorado he'd never seen before, quiet mountain roads, hidden parks, places where you could see the stars clearly. It was on one of these drives that Maria first brought her telescope. She'd loaded it into the back of her Honda without telling Tommy where they were going. I want to show you something, she said, driving up a winding mountain road. They stopped at a clearing overlooking the valley. The city lights were far below them, and the sky was darker than Tommy had ever seen it. Maria set up her telescope on a flat rock and spent a few minutes adjusting it. "Okay," she said, stepping back. "Take a look." Tommy peered through the telescope and gasped. He was looking at a planet, actually looking at another world hanging in space. It had stripes across it and looked almost like a marble. "That's Jupiter," Maria explained, her voice full of excitement. "See those 4 bright spots next to it? Those are moons. 4 different worlds. Each one completely unlike Earth. The one, called Europa, might even have an ocean under its ice." Tommy stared through the telescope, amazed. He'd looked up at the stars his whole life, but he'd never really seen them before. "It's incredible," he whispered. "When I was little," Maria said, "I used to imagine what it would be like to visit those moons, to be the first person to walk on another world." She looked up at the sky. "My dad thinks it's childish, but I still dream about it." They spent the next hour with Maria showing Tommy different planets and stars. She knew so much about each one, their names, their distances from Earth, what made them special. Tommy found himself falling not just for Maria but for her passion, her knowledge, her dreams. "You're going to get there someday," he said as they packed up the telescope. "I know you will." "What makes you so sure?" "Because you see things differently than other people. You see possibilities where others see impossibilities." The drive back was quieter, both of them lost in thought. When they reached the diner parking lot where Tommy had left his truck, neither wanted the evening to end. "Tommy," Maria said softly, "I need to tell you something. My dad doesn't know we've been meeting. He wouldn't understand." Tommy's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "He has very specific ideas about who I should spend time with. People from our social circle, other military families. He thinks it's important for maintaining proper appearances, and I don't fit into that picture," Tommy said, though it wasn't really a question. "It's not about you personally," Maria said quickly. "It's about his expectations, his fears. He wants to protect me, but sometimes his protection feels more like a prison." They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding what this meant. Their friendship, whatever it was becoming, would have to remain secret. "I don't want to stop seeing you," Maria said finally. "I don't want to stop either," Tommy replied. From that night on, they developed a system. Maria would call the auto shop and ask for Tommy, using coded messages about car problems. They'd meet at different places, sometimes the diner, sometimes at quiet spots in the mountains, always somewhere away from the base. Tommy started reading books about astronomy, wanting to understand Maria's passion better. Maria asked him to teach her about engines and mechanics, genuinely curious about how things worked. They were learning from each other, growing together in ways that felt natural and right. But the secrecy added weight to every moment. Every goodbye felt like it might be the last. Every time they met, there was an underlying tension, the knowledge that they were crossing lines that Maria's father had drawn long before they'd ever met. One evening, as they sat under the stars with Maria's telescope between them, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. "I've been accepted to graduate school," she said quietly, MIT, the astronomy program. Tommy felt his heart stop. "That's amazing, Maria. That's your dream." "I haven't told my dad yet. He's expecting me to move back home, maybe get a job at the local observatory, find someone suitable to marry." She wiped her eyes. "But I keep thinking about what you said about following your dreams, even when they seem impossible." Tommy reached over and took her hand. "You have to go. This is everything you've worked for, but what about us?" she asked. It was the first time either of them had acknowledged that there was an us to worry about. Tommy looked up at Jupiter, still visible through the telescope, and tried to find the right words. "Maybe some dreams are worth the risk," he said finally. Neither of them knew that in just 2 weeks, Colonel Patterson would discover their secret meetings, and everything would change forever. Labor Day weekend arrived faster than Tommy wanted. Maria had told her father she was camping with college friends, but instead, she and Tommy drove 3 hours into the mountains to a remote spot near a beautiful lake. They had 2 days of complete freedom, away from the base, away from watchful eyes, away from everything that reminded them of their different worlds. Tommy had borrowed a friend's camping gear, and Maria brought her telescope and enough food for a small army. They set up camp near the water where the only sounds were birds singing and wind moving through the pine trees. "I've never been camping like this," Maria admitted as Tommy showed her how to set up the tent. "My family always stayed in hotels. When we traveled, my dad used to take me and my sister camping when we were kids," Tommy said, hammering in tent stakes. "He said it was important to know how to live simply, to appreciate what you have." They spent the day hiking around the lake, talking about everything except the fact that Maria would be leaving for Boston in just 2 weeks. It was like they had made an unspoken agreement to pretend this weekend could last forever. As evening approached, Maria set up her telescope on a flat area overlooking the water. The sky was clearer than Tommy had ever seen it, with thousands of stars visible and the Milky Way stretching across the darkness like a river of light. "Look," Maria said, adjusting the telescope carefully. "Jupiter is perfect tonight." Tommy peered through the lens and saw the giant planet with its 4 moons lined up like tiny pearls. Even after all their stargazing sessions, it still took his breath away. "You know what's amazing?" Maria said, sitting beside him on a blanket. "Those moons are completely different worlds. One has volcanoes that shoot ice instead of lava. Another might have more water than all of Earth's oceans combined." "Do you think there's life out there?" Tommy asked. "I think the universe is too big for us to be alone," Maria replied. "Somewhere out there, maybe someone else is looking at our sun through their own telescope, wondering the same thing." They lay back on the blanket, looking up at the stars without the telescope. Tommy had never felt so peaceful, or so sad at the same time. "I have something to tell you," Maria said quietly. "I told my dad about MIT yesterday." Tommy's stomach tightened. "How did he take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. He thinks I'm making a mistake, throwing away opportunities here for some impossible dream." She turned to look at Tommy. "But then I remembered what you said about following your dreams even when they seem impossible." "What did you tell him? That I'm going, with or without his blessing?" Maria's voice was shaky but determined. "I've never stood up to him like that before." Tommy felt proud of her and terrified at the same time. If Colonel Patterson was angry about MIT, how would he react? If he found out about them? "There's something else," Maria continued. "I keep thinking about what happens next. You're going to start college soon. I'm going to Boston. We'll be living completely different lives." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Tommy knew this conversation was coming, but he still wasn't ready for it. "Maybe that doesn't have to change anything," he said, though even as he said it, he knew how naive it sounded. "Tommy, look at me." Maria sat up, and in the starlight, he could see tears in her eyes. "I love you. I love talking to you, learning from you, seeing the world through your eyes. But I'm scared." Tommy's heart stopped. "Scared of what?" "Scared of what? That loving you means giving up everything I've worked for. Scared that my father will find out and destroy any chance you have at college. Scared that I'm being selfish by wanting something I can't have." Tommy sat up and took her hands. "You're not being selfish, and you're not giving up anything. Your dreams matter, Maria. They matter more than whatever this is between us." "But what if I don't want to choose? What if I want both?" Tommy looked at her face in the starlight, memorizing every detail. "Then we figure it out, somehow." As the night grew colder, they moved closer together on the blanket. Maria pointed out different constellations, telling him the stories behind their names. Tommy had never felt so connected to another person, or so aware that time was running out. "Promise me something," Maria said as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. "Anything. Promise me that whatever happens, you won't give up on your dreams. Promise me you'll become the engineer you're meant to be." "I promise," Tommy said. "But only if you promise the same thing. Promise me you'll become the scientist who visits those alien moons." They kissed as the sun came up over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was desperate and gentle and full of everything they couldn't say out loud. The drive back to the base was quiet, both of them trying to hold on to the feeling of those 2 perfect days. Neither of them knew that someone had seen Maria's car parked at the camping area, and that person had already made a phone call to Colonel Patterson. 3 days after they returned from their camping trip, Tommy's world came crashing down. He was working under the hood of a Jeep when Bobby called him to the front office. "Colonel Patterson wants to see you," Bobby said, his face pale. Right now, Tommy's blood turned to ice. He'd never been called to see any officer before, let alone a colonel. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and walked slowly toward the base headquarters, his mind racing through every possible reason for this meeting. Colonel Patterson's office was exactly what Tommy expected, perfectly organized, with awards and commendations covering the walls. The colonel sat behind a large desk, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. 2 military police officers stood by the door. "Mr. Rodriguez," Colonel Patterson said without looking up from a file on his desk. "Please, sit down." Tommy sat in the chair across from the desk, trying to keep his hands from shaking. "I understand you've been spending time with my daughter," the colonel continued, finally looking up. His eyes were cold as winter. Tommy's mouth went dry. "Sir, I am not interested in excuses or explanations. Colonel Patterson cut him off. I'm interested in facts. Fact 1. You have been meeting my daughter secretly for the past month. Fact 2. You took her camping last weekend without my knowledge or permission. Fact 3. You have deliberately deceived both me and my family. Tommy wanted to explain that Maria had made her own choices, that he had never forced her to do anything, but the colonel's tone made it clear that speaking would only make things worse. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you, Mr. Rodriguez, the colonel continued. I see a young man with no prospects, no family connections, and no understanding of what it means to be responsible for someone else's future. My daughter is brilliant, educated, and destined for great things. You are a distraction she cannot afford. Each word hit Tommy like a physical blow. The colonel wasn't just attacking him, he was attacking everything Tommy hoped to become. Now, I've done some research on your background, Colonel Patterson said, opening the file. Your father has had some troubles with drinking. Your sister dropped out of high school. Your family lives paycheck to paycheck. Is this really the kind of influence you think my daughter needs? Tommy felt his face burn with shame and anger. Everything the colonel said was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. His father had struggled, but he'd never missed a day of work. His sister had made mistakes, but she was working hard to fix them. His family was poor, but they were good people. I can see you disagree with my assessment, the colonel said. So, let me make this simple for you. You have two choices. Choice 1, I make some phone calls, and you find yourself unable to get a job anywhere in this state. Your college dreams disappear, and you spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. Tommy's heart pounded. The colonel had the power to do exactly what he was threatening. Choice 2, the colonel continued. You enlist in the United States Army. Today, right now. You learn some discipline, see the world, and maybe become the kind of man who deserves to look my daughter in the eye someday. The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Tommy stared at the colonel, trying to process what he was hearing. I don't understand, Tommy said finally. It's simple. Join the army. Prove you're more than just a poor kid with big dreams. Show me you have the backbone to become something worthwhile. Or go home and explain to your parents why their son's future just disappeared. Tommy realized he was trapped. Colonel Patterson held all the cards, and they both knew it. But there was something else in the colonel's ultimatum, not just punishment, but a challenge, a chance to prove himself. If I enlist, Tommy said slowly, what happens to Maria? My daughter will go to MIT as planned. She will focus on her studies and her future. And if you're the man I hope you might become, maybe someday, that future could include you, but not as you are now. Tommy looked at the two MPs standing by the door, then back at the colonel. I'll enlist. Colonel Patterson nodded and pressed a button on his phone. Send in Sergeant Martinez. A recruiter entered the room carrying papers and a pen. Son, he said to Tommy, are you ready to become a soldier? As Tommy signed the papers that would change his life forever, he thought about Maria. Would she understand? Would she forgive him for leaving without saying goodbye? Would she wait for him? Or would she move on and forget about the boy who fixed her car? He didn't know the answers to any of those questions. All he knew was that Colonel Patterson had given him a choice between destruction and transformation, and he had chosen to fight for a future that might someday include the girl he loved. Fort Benning, Georgia, was hotter than any place Tommy had ever been. The bus ride from Colorado had taken 2 days, and he'd spent most of it staring out the window, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Basic training was designed to break you down and build you back up, and for the first few weeks, Tommy wasn't sure he was going to survive the breaking down part. The drill sergeants yelled constantly, the physical training was brutal, and every day felt like it lasted forever. But something unexpected happened as the weeks went by. Tommy discovered he was tougher than he'd thought. When other recruits complained about the early mornings and hard work, Tommy just remembered his father working in the fields from sunrise to sunset. When they complained about the food, Tommy thought about the nights his family had eaten rice and beans for dinner 3 days in a row. His drill sergeant, a tough guy named Sergeant Williams, seemed to take special interest in Tommy Rodriguez. He said one day after a particularly difficult training exercise, I know your story. Rich girl, angry father, now you're here trying to prove something. Tommy kept his eyes straight ahead, not sure if he was supposed to respond. Let me tell you what I see, Sergeant Williams continued. I see a kid who let someone else decide what he was worth. You want to be worth something? Stop looking for other people's approval and start being the man you know you can be. Those words stuck with Tommy. He'd spent so much energy trying to prove he was good enough for Maria, good enough for her father, that he'd forgotten to prove it to himself. The physical training got easier as Tommy got stronger. The mental challenges became opportunities to show leadership. When his unit had to build a bridge across a river using only basic materials, Tommy's mechanical knowledge made him the natural leader of the project. "You've got a gift for this stuff, Rodriguez," his squad leader told him. "Ever think about becoming an engineer in the army?" Tommy had heard about combat engineers, soldiers who built bridges, cleared obstacles, and constructed bases in dangerous places. It combined everything he loved about fixing things with the chance to serve his country. "Tell me more," Tommy said. The advanced training for combat engineers was even harder than basic training, but Tommy thrived. He learned to build structures under pressure, to solve problems when lives depended on the solution, to lead other soldiers when everything was falling apart. Letters from home brought news from Colorado. His parents were proud of him. His sister had gotten her GED and was working at a hospital, and occasionally his mother would mention seeing Maria around town before she left for college. Tommy wrote letters to Maria, but he never sent them. What could he say? That he was sorry for leaving without saying goodbye. That he thought about her every time he looked at the stars. That he hoped someday he'd be the kind of man she could love without having to choose between him and her dreams. By his second year in the army, Tommy had been promoted to corporal and was leading a squad of engineers. He'd saved enough money to start college when his service ended, and more importantly, he'd learned things about himself that no classroom could have taught him. When the Gulf War started in 1991, Tommy's unit was deployed to Saudi Arabia. For the first time, he was using his skills in real combat situations, building supply lines and forward bases that kept American forces moving forward. It was in the desert under stars that reminded him of those nights with Maria that Tommy finally understood what Colonel Patterson had given him. Not punishment, but opportunity, the chance to discover who he really was when everything familiar was stripped away. He'd joined the army as a boy trying to prove he deserved love. He was becoming a man who knew he deserved respect, especially from himself. Letters from home told him that Maria had graduated from MIT with honors and was working for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. She was living her dream, just like Tommy knew she would. Colonel Patterson had retired and moved to Florida. The base where Tommy had once fixed cars seemed like something from another lifetime. When Tommy's 4-year enlistment ended in 1992, he had the GI Bill to pay for college, leadership experience that would serve him for life, and an unshakable confidence in his own abilities. He'd learned that real strength wasn't about proving yourself to other people, it was about becoming the person you were meant to be. Years later, Tommy would become a successful civil engineer, building bridges and schools and hospitals. He'd marry a wonderful woman who loved him for exactly who he was. He'd raise children who never doubted their worth. And sometimes, on clear nights, he'd look up at Jupiter and its moons, remembering a girl who taught him to reach for the stars and a father who taught him he was strong enough to catch them. The real test of Colonel Patterson's harsh lesson came 20 years later when Tommy's own daughter brought home a boyfriend he wasn't sure was right for her. In that moment, Tommy remembered what it felt like to be judged by someone else's standards, and he chose to trust his daughter's judgment instead. He never forgot the gift hidden inside that painful push toward becoming the man he was meant to be. Sometimes the people who challenge us the most are the ones who believe in us enough to demand our best, even when it breaks our hearts to reach for it.